Hello everyone, my name is Rick Durgitz. I'm the Complex Service Manager for the Red Power Stores. We're a group of 10 stores in northern Iowa. And welcome to my series of videos on combine settings, adjustments, and basically just trying to understand how our combine works. So over the years of doing combine clinics, it's great to give out information, but there's a lot to go over on how to make our combine work correctly and make your harvest go easier and better results. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to take basically the contents of a combine clinic and I'm breaking it down into different sections. We're going to do a section on feeder, threshing, cleaning and sieves, automation, just breaking it down into smaller snippets. So we're going to get them on YouTube clips that will be put on our company website, and you'll be able to go reference those whenever you need to. Because again, clinic's great, and I love it when all you come because it's really good interaction, questions, and I learn a lot from you as well as the other way around. And I want to make it in a more usable format for you as you go forward. So again, if you get out in the field during the fall and you're having trouble remembering a segment, you can go to our website, pull up that particular YouTube clip, run through it. You can speed it up, slow it down, back up, do whatever you need to. And again, as we go along, I need the feedback from you of what I'm missing. I'm just trying to do a general overview of what I think you need. But again, I can adjust these season to season if something new comes up and add or subtract, do whatever we need to. So thanks again for watching. We'll have, like I said, several different segments as we go through. In this video segment, we're going to deal with the feeder houses. And I've got a couple machines up here. We got a brand new 8250. And then over here, it's about a 2011, 12, 8230. And we're gonna go over some things just in the feeder houses. And the reason I got this age range is there's not a lot of difference in it, but there are some subtle ones I want to bring up and some different things we need to be looking at from time to time. So one thing we want to start with is on the feeder houses is some subtle changes over the years. Again, this is on our 8250. One of the biggest changes that's come along is the ability to have the hydraulic tilt faceplate option versus the mechanical, and we'll take a look at that after a bit. And the other thing that's changed over time, of course, is the feeder change, drums, and the tensioning system. Much more robust system now than what we've had in the past, so that's been upgraded. On the hydraulic tilt faceplate, we'll show you in a minute what you have to do in the display to be able to switch that or move that. We do have a high lockout valve on here if you need to. Other subtle changes is back in about 2016, we went to 21 spline, basically the 1000 RPM spline versus the 540. But in a lot of regards, feeder house has stayed the same over time, and it's been working out well. Faceplate, everything else has been beefed up a little as our heads get heavier and heavier, but for the most part, the feeder itself has remained the same. So here we're back on our 7230 machine. Again, very, very similar. The changes we're looking at is our tensioner for the feeder chains, not quite as robust. It is the spring-loaded version. But what I want to point out mostly is up here we have the mechanical tilt faceplate, where we have to loosen bolts up in order to tilt that fore and aft. And then also down here we've got the 540 spline system on our feeder gearbox. So a point to remember here is if you're trading combines up or switching heads around, make sure you're aware which spline you need so you don't get ready to go to the field and realize you got the wrong spline and have to change the yokes or the shafts out on the head yet. But again, a lot of the rest of the feeder house, very, very much the same over time. So one other thing I'd like to point out on the 50 series is we now have the option for dual tilt cylinders. So for our faceplate, we can have dual tilt for the lateral tilt now. And again, very, very helpful once we're getting into our 12-row chopping heads, 16 rows, things like that. It helps this faceplate tilt much easier if we have the dual cylinder option. So one thing I'd like to point out in differences as we go along is this, of course, is our newest version where we have the cast iron slats with the support behind them. Feeder drums changed a little bit. We don't have the support rings on there. And again, this is time has gone on. We've had, if you go clear back to the 10 series, we've changed this makeup many, many times trying to get the best configuration. This is what we're running with currently with the 4 strands. We've gone to a much heavier chain now, and then the cast slats. So then if we go back over here to some older versions, And again, we've got 4 strands, but we have a distinct difference where we have steel slats and then we have support rings welded on the feeder drum. So what's the difference? Well, basically it's for rocks. If we get a rock in here, it's less prone to bend or slat with the support behind it. Whereas on the cast one, where they've got the support ring cast right into it, we don't need the support ring anymore, because that cast, the thick boss on the back of this would push against the drum to prevent this from bending. But again, same kind of basic thing as far as the layout with the 4 strands, but again, we've beefed it up much more as we go back over to this one. So again, with the cast slats, you can see the boss on the back here. That's what's supporting this if we do get a rock in there. And again, much, much heavier chain strands than what we were using. We've kind of gone over just an overlay of the front of this and the changes from years, different models and whatnot. So now we need to dive into what do we really need to know for field operation. And again, the feeder house, extremely important part to get our crop mat started up this machine. We want a nice even crop mat as it moves from here through the rock trap into the transition cone on into the machine. Starting correctly up here is the key to success all the way back till we get out the sieves and the residue spreaders. So what adjustments should we be aware of in field operations in order to make that happen? Well, of course, it's going to depend on what crop we're in, head size and whatnot. One thing that has just helped us tremendously over the years is draper heads and soybeans. In my book, that's one of the biggest changes agriculture's seen probably in the last 20 years as far as innovations that's really helped us. And it's really not really a new innovation, but as far as having the ability to use a draper head to harvest soybeans is. And the reason that is we're feeding everything in heads first. And I mean, that goes clear back to a thrash machine. Whenever we're feeding bundles into a thrash machine, it was always heads first. Well, the same applies to this. If we got especially in soybeans, wheat, oats, whatever, as we're bringing that material across in a draper, heads first feeds into this much easier than an auger head. Because an auger head just grabbing it, kind of wadding up in a pile and shoving it in there, where the draper is a much more even flow. So that helps us tremendously in what I call crop mat management. So once we've got our head under control, and again, corn's a little different because again, we're just picking the ears. It depends on how much other dry material we're bringing in. And I realize some afternoons when it gets dead dry, we're bringing in a lot of extra material. And it's very hard to get it separated in the head sometimes. But both of these scenarios come to the first thing we're going to encounter, of course, is a feeder drum. So as we're talking about feeder drum stops and what difference it really makes, is what we're really adjusting here is the height of the drum in the feeder house. So it'd be the drum and the chain, and we're adjusting the lower height of that. The upper stop is a fixed position within the feeder house. The lower drum stop is the one that we're adjusting up or down, and that's where you see here with the chart. We have 2 holes covered with the inner bracket. This hole you can see through daylight, so that tells us we're on that setting right there. So again, as we're in that setting 4 that we've discussed before, what's it really doing? Well, we're adjusting the height or the dimension right here. How far up is the center line of our drum and the chain? And that's what that lower stop sets. So what difference does it make? Well, again, in our crop mat feeding in this machine, if we've got a fairly thick crop mat, and this is quite heavy actually, and we have that drum stop over there set, say setting number 2, which would lower this substantially, that means the crop mat itself has to build up enough to lift this up to get started up the feeder house. And again, our crop mat entering the feeder house is the start of a good thresh all the way through the machine. We want a nice even crop mat all the way through there. If this is set too low, our crop mat is coming in here and it actually starts spinning on it, and then it finally gets enough build up to where it physically can lift this up. We're limiting the amount of material that we can get in this machine. So therefore, that's why we want that drum stop in that 4 setting, whether you're corn or soybeans, and it lets the crop mat get in there and get going. Are there any scenarios where we'd need to set those lower? Maybe. The only thing that comes to mind would possibly be if we happen to have a 6-row corn head on, or maybe a 30-foot platform and we're in a lighter crop. then yes, we may want to set that stop and lower the center line back down. Because if we have, you can visualize right here, if we have a super thin crop mat coming in here, this is really going to struggle to get a hold of it and keep it moving until it bunches up. But in any case where we've got, I'm going to say, you know, your 35-foot heads, 8 row and above, we want this up. Because again, we want that crop mat to be able to get started in there and just away it goes without spinning on it to get it started up the feeder house. So here we're back on our 30 series machine. This is a 3-position system and a little bit harder to understand. We don't have a decal here to help. I'm going to insert another slide as we're going along. You'll see it pop up here, and it will show you a little bit of how we adjust them. Same scenario or principle. We have 3 positions, and we want this one in the highest one we can so that drum can float up and allow our crop mat into the machine the best. So here's just a quick example. Again, we're in setting number 4. This drum is quite heavy, and that's about how much travel we have left going up or down. It's pretty limited. It's about max up. It can float up and down a little bit, and it will self-adjust to our crop mat thickness a little bit. But there again, that's what just kind of an example. That thing's fairly heavy, and we don't want to force the crop mat into lifting all that weight. And again, this probably got quite a bit heavier as we went to the cast slats over the steel ones, and in conjunction with the heavier chain. So between those two things, we added quite a bit of weight to that, and that's where we want that up to start with. So as we're dealing with faceplate angle now and how this helps us with the harvest process, again on this one we've got the hydraulic adjust. The older version you do have to loosen the bolts up to tip it back and forth. But why is it important and how does it affect harvest? Well, it's really important when we start looking at corn heads and we start looking at deck plate angles. We definitely want to have this adjusted so we have the correct deck plate angle for the head on. And I'm going to put a little chart in this video so you can see what you need for deck plate angles. And on chopping corn head is extremely important, because if we think about a chopping corn head in deck plate angles, we're really looking at not only that and the performance of the gathering chain and everything, but underneath our chopping unit is probably the most important, because it's similar to a lawnmower deck. We always want the front of the chopping unit a little bit lower than the back, so as it's winging around cutting the stalk, we only cut it once. If we happen to end up in this scenario where the front is high, it's going to wing around, cut the front of the stalk, and then as we travel forward, the backside coming around is going to cut it a second time. It consumes a lot of horsepower when we get in that scenario. So deck plate angle, chopping corn, it's extremely important that we maintain what we need in order to get it to cut correctly, not consume too much horsepower. Now the second one that we look at would be in the world of if we have auger heads. Our 30-20 auger head has a very important deck plate, or not deck plate, but rear sheet angle. And that's really on those in order to get the float arms to work correctly. We don't want it reared up or back. It also affects the guard angle. So there's two important parts on a 30-20 that are affected by faceplate angle or back sheet angle. When we move into the world of drapers, we got a lot of leeway, because on those where we have a tilt knife cylinder built into the head and we can get our guard angle where we need it with that. This isn't nearly as important. What I would suggest on those is we want to be in the middle, whether it be on a hydraulic adjust system or on the mechanical adjust. Get your faceplate in a mid position, and that will give our tilt knife cylinder, basically put it in the middle and get it enough room to move. If we're skewed either clear back, clear forward, we're either going to have that cylinder crunch clear up or extend it way out too far to get where we need to. It doesn't give it enough room to travel. So again, faceplate angle, very important on the front in order to maintain whatever head that we're working with. So as we look at a mechanical adjust, same scenario, same principles involved. We just got to loosen up our bolts and let this tilt and get at the correct angle. Of course, there's bolts on both sides on these. We loosen and retighten. But again, important adjustment, whether we're hydraulic or mechanical. So now as we're looking at it, we're going to move into feeder chain tension. Again, this is a little bit older system. Same principle where we tighten and loosen the spring up in order to maintain the correct dimension on the guide. And this is again to maintain correct tension on the feeder chain. Very important that we check this often, especially if we're installing a new chain, because they will stretch initially right away. So a very important daily check is to make sure our feeder chain tension is staying where it's supposed to. Another thing to look at, like on this particular machine, we're probably getting to the end of the life of the feeder chain because we're starting to almost run out of slot on this. But again, this is a little bit older system, still very viable, works well, but important to watch our feeder chain tension. So here we are on the newer machine. Same basic principles, but it is beefed up a lot over time. Again, we have our guide to tell us where we need to adjust this to, but equally as important, we want to check our feeder chain often, make sure it's tensioned properly. Helps prevent it from skipping a cog or anything, and again, make sure both sides are even. So now as we look at the side of the machine and our drive line, what do we need there? Well, we have our header drive gearbox down here. And I do want to point out there's two variations. There is a heavy-duty header drive gearbox down here. Difference in it is black and it has cooling fins on it. And that's kind of the direction we need to be moving with that heavy-duty one when we get into 12-row chopping corn heads, 16 rows. And it just helps this to run cool. Now we have, on all of these, they tend to run very, very warm. Even with just a 40-foot draper on it, if we're cutting some pretty tough beans, this typically runs so warm you can't really put your hand on it. And what we have found here, and we're doing at our dealerships, is we are switching the oil out of this. It typically comes with just Hytran, and we are putting a 7590 synthetic gear lube in these. This is just a basic open bevel gear set in here. Nothing real fancy. I've had these apart before, but they do tend to run warm, so that's why this synthetic gear lube seems to help keep them cool, run a little bit cooler. Now we have a sight glass, you can't really see, but it's back down under here. And what I want to point out is you want to look at your sight glass, because we've had some issues with them getting warm enough. They're a polycarbonate little window, and it will actually start melting that window out. So I'd like you to make sure you inspect that sight glass, and if it's starting to get deformed a little or starting to seep a little bit, there is a glass version of that, or the eye in it is glass. There's two different actually variations of them. One of them has a little brass housing, one is an aluminum housing, both glass. The parts guys at your local Red Power store have the numbers of them. So I would definitely say if we're changing fluid in these, get to the 7590 synthetic and put one of the new style sight glasses in there, because we've had some cases where that sight glass will deform and leak the fluid all out, and then we have a gear case failure. So again, keep an eye on that and make some changes on the fluid, and that'll help that a lot. Now as we start to move rearward on our feeder house on the left side here, another gearbox up here, doesn't have the issue with the overheating. Again, this one's been changed over time and beefed up too. This is our feeder drive gearbox. So it drives not only the feeder chain, but our rock trap back here. Sight glass on it, very easy. We need to have the feeder lowered so the line would be level, and then we can check the oil level in that. So very simple on that. So another feature I want to make, or another point I should say I want to make over here, is our good old rock trap over here. We want to make sure that we keep this dumped out on a regular basis. Otherwise this trough up in here is going to get full of dirt, grain, whatever else. If it happens to get a little moisture in there, it gets packed in there pretty hard. And if we don't keep the trough area cleaned out, the rock trap can't really do its job. And if we do have a rock or anything in there, it might scoot right over the trough that's supposed to be empty, and it would still end up in the machine. So good idea, make sure you dump the rock trap often. So just a quick point here, a couple things to point out on our multi-point connectors. The hydraulic one, of course, we hook up for hydraulics. Doesn't hurt to get that cleaned off periodically. I know it builds up a lot of material, but it'd be a good idea to keep spraying that off. Maybe some brake cleaner a little bit. One thing I do want to point out with our electrical connector is if it happens to hang like this out in a rainstorm, you know, maybe whatever, it's laying like this, these are great about collecting rainwater. Right down in here, we'll get water in this housing and it will create periodic fault codes and shorts because there's water down in here. So whenever we're not attached to a head, make sure that you're in the storage compartment and the rainwater won't get in it. And again, try to be careful with this. We've seen several instances where we forget to unhook this when we back away from the head, and that's never a good day because this stretches about so far and then it rips and makes a real mess of things. So again, treat this very gently. So one thing to point out on feeder cylinders, we have a huge variety of feeder cylinders over years gone by, different sizes. Make sure you've got enough feeder cylinder to lift the head that you're putting on the front of it, whether you've traded machines or went upsizing heads. Check with your local Red Power store. They can help you out to figure out if you're correct sizing. They can be changed out. We can put bigger ones in there. Years ago, we did have a little bit of struggles on some of the machines lifting some heads just because of sizing the cylinders. We've gotten well past that now. So just be aware, if you happen to gone from an 8 to a 12 row chopping head, make sure we got enough lift cylinder on your machine to lift it easily. One thing too to point out, really not a huge deal, these cylinders look like they're double acting with the 50 series. They made a change. Really, they're not. They're still a single acting cylinder off of here. The secondary side is basically a vent in there. They sourced a cylinder that was made to be double acting, and they just put an extra line going back to vent on the downstroke side of it. So again, still single acting. So one thing I do want to point out is how do we get this hydraulic faceplate to work correctly? So it works in the same circuit that you would use for a tilt knife cylinder on a draper head. So we're using the shift button, but we have to tell it, do we want it to activate a feature on the header or the feeder? And the way we toggle between those is we go to toolbox, and then we're going to go to the feeder option, and here we have in the drop down menus we can either select feeder features or header features. If we're on header, then the shift reel is going to do the tilt knife cylinder, but if we want the faceplate, we're going to do feeder features, and then we simply use the shift button on the back and reel 4 aft to activate the faceplate moving forward and backwards. And there it gives us, it tells you where you're at from 0, whether you're back or forward. So it works pretty nicely that way. So that's how you activate the features between header and feeder on the faceplate. So here's just a shot of the faceplate moving forward and back. And again, it has quite a range of travel that way of going forward or backward.
Hey, thanks everyone for watching. This brings us to the end of this video segment. I hope you found it to be beneficial. If you would like to see more in this video series, by all means go to the Red Power Team website, which is of course at redpowerteam.com. Navigate up to that video icon at the top, and from there it'll bring up the menu of the rest of the videos that you can watch, whichever ones you find interesting. Thank you.